Hello, everyone. It's Austin with 505-O-Matic, and today we're lucky to be joined by Secretary of State and Lieutenant Governor candidate Maggie Toulouse Oliver. Maggie, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks so much for having me, Austin. Happy to be here.
We wanted to just jump right in on the ongoing case at the Public Regulation Commission of the state of New Mexico. They're considering an acquisition of our electric company, PNM, by the private equity firm Blackstone. What's your position on that acquisition? What would you like to say about that?
Well, it's a good question. First and foremost, I should be very clear. I oppose private equity. I think it's bad. And I really, it's very unclear whether this deal will even be approved by the PRC. Apparently, there are already a lot of technical issues with the application. I don't want PNM to be acquired or to be partnering with private equity. But what I do want is to help find a solution for PNM to make sure that it can keep ratepayers' rates reasonable. Because at the end of the day, something as critical as electricity, we all use it every single day. And it's an absolute necessity in our lives. And everything else is getting so expensive right now. Helping PNM to find a way to be able to, diversify in terms of the funding that they need to keep ratepayers' rates low absolutely has to be a priority for the state of New Mexico.
I want to drill down on possible solutions that you would consider. Your primary opponent has suggested the idea of actually the public becoming the owner of PNM. Can you talk about that? Would you rule that out as a solution?
I don't think I would completely rule it out, but I would rule it out for right now. Because first things first, the state of New Mexico right now, we have a lot of very critical programs that, quite frankly, are not being managed the way they need to be managed. And I'll point to CYFD as a prime example. We have critical programs in state government right now that we need to make sure that we get our arms around as a state and make sure that those are functioning the way they need to function first and foremost. Secondly, as Secretary of State, I work a lot with the rural electrical co-ops, and granted, those are more microcosms of something as large as PNM. But I often see a lot of problems with the way sort of a publicly elected board or ratepayer elected board functions as well. Unfortunately, there's frequently corruption, there are frequently mismanagement issues. I think we might be trading one set of problems for another if we move that direction.
On maybe what you might have been referring to as like dysfunctional or problematic state agencies with the state of New Mexico, what are, in your view, what if you were elected as lieutenant governor, what is it that you would do to try to maybe fix or reform CYFD? How have you sort of approached what the legislature's been looking at? I know that there's been a commission that's been proposed. There's been a new agency that's been proposed. What do you think of those moves so far?
I don't necessarily think that layering additional bureaucracies on top of an existing bureaucracy is the solution. I think we have the core elements of what we need. We also have a foundational lawsuit, the Kevin S. lawsuit, that set out a set of recommendations. And really that is a roadmap for the state to follow in order to bring CYFD up to snuff. And I think the other thing that's really important to keep in mind is that the individuals who work for CYFD, the ones who are out in the field, the investigators, the social workers, this is a very emotionally challenging and difficult job. These folks are experiencing burnout. There's a lot of turnover. So I think we need to be looking at not only increasing pay and even maybe contemplating hazard pay for the individuals who are going into just, the worst kinds of situations that you would ever want to see. But we also need to be investing in training, and we need to be investing in mental health care for those individuals, because what we want to do, we want to bring in compassionate, smart, well-trained people to do these jobs and to do them well, not overwhelm them with caseloads of, say, 200 kids each. That's absolutely insane. You can't even touch a case, twice a year under those conditions, right? And then we want to make sure that we are supporting them and we want to keep these well-trained, compassionate individuals who are taking care of our kids, their career. We want to give them all the support that they need.
I remember reporting a couple of years ago and looking at the recommendations in the Kevin S. lawsuit and seeing some testimony by one of the child psychologists. And he was talking about the need also for foster families. What is it what could you do as Lieutenant Governor? Like, what does that position kind of set you up? What kind of powers would you have in the executive branch to try to get more foster families actually involved with getting kids, like actually taking kids in?
Yeah. You're right. In fact, we don't have enough foster families right now. And in fact, as many people know, we have a bunch of kids living essentially in an office complex in Albuquerque because there's nowhere to place them. We need foster families and we need treatment foster families, those that can work with kids who have special needs. And right now, the gamut that families have to go to get approved to foster is really extensive. Now, I don't think we should be placing kids with just anybody. We do need a process, but it also comes back to making sure we have well-trained staff to go through those applications. And then if there are parents that are maybe falling short of the mark or that, don't quite have everything they need, we should be investing in some sort of training program or educational program to bring them up to the level of what we need them to be at in order to foster kids. Because really the best possible solution, all these kids that are essentially living in an office park, they should be in a home with a family, with people who actually care. And we should try to get it to a point where we're not rejecting these people who are actually willing to take kids into their home, but figuring out how we can get them to the point that they need to be. So as Lieutenant Governor, there's a couple of roles I can play in this. First of all, the office of Lieutenant Governor is a bully pulpit. I will have the ability to advocate and ideally work with the next governor to be a senior advisor and to help work on these issues and to really take up the cause for foster families and foster children to help try to bring new families into the fold. And then on the legislative side, as president of the Senate, obviously working behind the scenes to help find and craft the ideal legislation to make sure that we get compromises that are desperately needed in order to make these reforms and potentially to cast a deciding vote if necessary.
I'm glad that you mentioned, these sort of two elements of what the lieutenant governor does, because I think a lot of just regular folks in any state might not know what a lieutenant governor does. What has Howie Morales, our current lieutenant governor, what has he done in those two arenas? What would you sort of continue from him, and are there things that you think that there's an opportunity to do now in the upcoming administration if you do get elected?
Right. Well, first of all, I think Howie's been an absolutely fantastic lieutenant governor, and he and Governor Michelle Lujan Grisham have really worked together as a team. There have been past administrations where maybe governor and lieutenant governor don't even really talk that much, but I really feel like Michelle Lujan Grisham has really brought Howie in and allowed him to be a true partner with her in the administration, and she has tasked him with certain areas that he particularly cares about and specializes in. As a PhD in education, Howie has really led a lot of the administration's efforts on improving our educational system and using his office and his voice and his advocacy for new programs. He's also a big champion, of course, of sports in our schools and kids being involved in youth sports programs and all of the benefits that kids gain from that. So I think, for me, potentially as lieutenant governor in the next administration, the issues I care about deeply, being a New Mexican since the age of 3, I'm 50 now, economic diversification is absolutely key in our state, and I really want to work on economic development. We need to get away from the boom and bust nature of oil and gas in our state, not only for revenues, but for jobs. And while oil and gas and the extraction industry are going to continue to exist for some time, really working with those companies to transition to, cleaner forms of energy, geothermal, for example, basically use all the same equipment that we use for fracking right now. We could basically transition the equipment, transition those jobs with minimal training, keep people on the job, and then start using renewable sources of energy that are cleaner. So that would be maybe one area. And also just looking at how else can we economically diversify in our state. Right now, we're focused on, bringing in call centers and data centers and things like that. But, where are the corporate jobs? Where is the ability to climb a career ladder in many of these jobs? It's not there. So when we are bringing in corporate entities from other states, making sure that there is a commitment and an investment into hiring New Mexicans, working together with our educational institutions to ensure that the training is there, and to start bringing people up through the career pipeline in those industries.
I want to zoom out a little bit. So, you've got, as Secretary of State for the state of New Mexico, you've got a really great track record. I think independently, it's been found that New Mexico has some of the best run elections in the United States. Why are you running for this other position? Why not stay around in this office? And are you worried about handing the reins to somebody else?
Well, thank you. I'm really proud of the work we've done here in New Mexico over the last 20 or so years. I started as Bernalillo County Clerk about 20 years ago, and now I'm in I'm in my 20th year in election administration, and we really have brought New Mexico from, being kind of a middle of the road, definitely not last, but, not really anything to write home about in the election sphere. And, the last 2 years we were number 1 in the nation. We're currently number 7 in the nation in the top 10. Actually, we're literally tied for 3rd place with like 4 or 5 other states. So I'm really proud of where we are. And really that's just because other states have started doing great things too. And that's what we want nationally. I'm term limited, so I cannot seek another term in this office. I love my job and I love election work, but I am more than just an election administrator. I'm a state executive. I'm a policy expert in a wide variety of different areas, and I've been, of course, working with the legislature for well over 30 years in various different capacities. I did not think this was the right time to step out of government. There is so much happening, especially at the national level. Here in New Mexico, we've created an oasis for rights, for forward movement, and for ensuring that our citizens have a future that we can all look forward to. And I want to help keep that going. As an expert in running government, I felt like I could best serve the state, continue to serve the state in the capacity of lieutenant governor, and really be a partner again with the next governor in pursuing a really positive policy outlook for the next 4 to 8 years in New Mexico.
And so I understand, in electoral politics, there is a custom or a norm of staying neutral when it comes to other races that might be on the ballot at the same time. With respect to that, what would, given you're talking so much about being a partner with the next governor, what are the qualities of a governor that you want to see if you do get elected? Like, what are the things that you want to see out of your partner in the executive branch?
I love that question, because you're not asking me who are you voting for or who are you supporting, because I think that's irrelevant. As potentially the next lieutenant governor, regardless of who wins the primary, I have to be a partner and work with that person. And I think the 2 Democratic candidates both have fantastic qualities that would serve them well. What I want to see, first of all, I think right now there's a lot of challenge between the 4th floor and the legislature. A lot of challenges in communication, making sure that everyone is sort of working together on the same page. I would like to help potentially bridge that gap, and I would like to see a governor who is really, really invested, and this is, let me be very clear, any comment that I make doesn't have anything to do with our current governor, right? It's what I want to see in the next governor. Someone who really is willing to sit down, listen, compromise, make deals, whatever it takes with the legislature to kind of get where we need to go. And I think that open communication, making sure that everybody's clear what everybody's priorities are, and making sure that everybody's working together to meet those needs, I think is really important. Somebody who is a listener, I think, is really key. I know in my experience working with legislators and with advocates, I think making sure that there is not only an open door to the advocacy community, but making sure a lot of policies sometimes I think come from, they're the brainchild of politicians. And sometimes that works really well, but I feel like that's a top-down approach. I feel like as a public servant, it's really important for us to listen to advocacies and citizens that are living the challenges and problems that need to be addressed, for us to hear those stories. And I would really like the next governor to have a very open door policy to be able to hear, okay, what is going on for people who are living below the poverty line? What is going on for people who are undocumented in New Mexico? What is going on for women who don't have access to women's health, or to anybody living in rural New Mexico who can't get to a healthcare provider? And then we listen to those stories, we take those recommendations, and then we figure out what can work best for New Mexico. And I think the next governor, if they do that, can be extremely successful.
And just so anyone who's not super familiar with the legislature, the fourth floor refers to where the governor's office is in relation to the rest of the Capitol building. So that relationship is extremely important, where the executive branch and the legislative branch have to come to some sort of agreement. If the legislative branch is going to pass a bill, the governor must sign it or not. And anyway, on that point, I mean, we've seen a number of bills, proposals to change the law that maybe not necessarily failed as a result of some sort of miscommunication between the two branches. But we've seen, I think, really good ideas die in the legislature a lot, over and over and over. What comes to mind for you when I say that?
Well, what comes to mind for me is the fact that we don't have a professional legislature. I think we romanticize the idea of a citizen legislature, individuals that, work and live their daily lives, in their professions and where they live, and then they come up to the state's capital 30 or 60 days a year, depending on the year, and they do the people's work and then go home. The reality is that worked great in 1912 when we had farmers and ranchers and railroad folks from all over the state, in their, carts and buggies coming up to Santa Fe. It doesn't work in 2026. We live in the 21st century now, and there's so much work that the people need to do. I wouldn't take a position necessarily on the time in the legislature, because I think even with a 60-day session, legislators could always find the time to create space in those sessions. But professionalizing the legislature, paying our legislators, they took a really great step last year with adding an in-district staff person for each legislator, because, if you're getting calls and emails from constituents and, you need to be represented at something when you're not physically there, I think that's really important. But really ensuring that each legislator also has staff that are dedicated to them here in Santa Fe, not just during the session, but year-round, to be working on these policy issues. Let's not forget, even though they only meet 30 or 60 days a year, they're still working year-round in interim committees. And there's a lot of policy decisions that are getting made in interim committees. And, I don't necessarily have a problem with lobbyists in general. What I think the issue is, and the issue that I have, is that sometimes the only information about policy that legislators are getting is from lobbyists, right? And so being able to research issues, understand from the point of view of the legislator how they feel about a position, not just towing a party line, not just voting the way a lobbyist asks them to vote, I think is incredibly important, and I think could pave the way to having a more productive session where a lot of those really good bills you're talking about don't go the way of the dodo and die.
And then just to drill down and follow up, like, say we do get this, we get paid lawmakers, we get a legislature that meets maybe more than 2 months in every other year. What are some of those good ideas that have died over and over? I mean, I think of just
paid medical leave. Paid medical leave is probably the number one thing that comes to mind. I think it's such a no-brainer. So many people don't realize that just because you get FMLA, in other words, the ability to not lose your job while you're on family leave or maternity leave or helping a sick loved one, doesn't mean you're getting paid. You have to have stored up all of that paid leave, earned all of that paid leave over, frankly, it would take years for anybody to earn 3 months worth of paid leave. under any sort of normal compensation practice. So I think, there are so many moms that I know, thankfully I wasn't one of them, but so many moms that I know that have to go back to work after 4 weeks or 6 weeks after having a baby. And if you've ever had a kid, that is, your brain is still kind of mush. You're not sleeping, and then you don't get that bonding time, that really incredible bonding time. So we need to do that. SB 17 last year is another bill that died, and it would have put really reasonable protections on guns. We're not talking about taking guns away. We're not talking about putting unreasonable restrictions. They're the reasonable restrictions that most people support when it comes to gun use. That's another one that really needs to get passed.
Another idea, I'm wondering if what you would support. You mentioned lobbyists, and it can be difficult for the average person to really understand who is pressuring lawmakers to do this or do that or vote this way or vote that way. Or there was a proposal that has now died twice by Representative Sarah Silva of Las Cruces, who also was co-sponsored by Senator Jeff Steinborn, also from the Las Cruces area. That would have required more transparency around when a lobbyist takes a position on a bill. What do you think of that bill as introduced? Is there anything that needs to be done to that proposal, or do you think there's anything more that the executive branch could do to try to get that across the finish line maybe next year?
I think the bill, when it was first drafted, I think envisioned a lot more. And my staff and I worked very closely with Senator Steinborn on sort of not the same version of the bill, but an older version, to really get it to a place where it was balancing transparency with the administrative challenges that, would not just for lobbyists, but for my office, which is, of course, the office that regulates lobbying activity. And so making sure we're getting enough useful information, so sort of setting a bar, I believe, of $100, of an expenditure of $100 or more. Less than that, you're getting into sticks of gum and, a Kleenex, right? Things like that. So, especially in today's economy. So, figuring out a good, a reasonable money limit for where you report from, and how frequently, because I do think, and then also the piece of making sure that folks know kind of which bills the lobbyist is advocating for or against on behalf, or even just there's a third category, right, which is just we're not taking a position on this bill, but here, let me just give you some information from my client's perspective, right? There's the education piece as well. So I think we struck a great balance. I think with many of these kinds of transparency bills, for example, the very first bill that we passed to finally bring the New Mexico Campaign Reporting Act up to snuff, the second year I was Secretary of State, there were well over 8 years prior to that in which Senator Peter Wirth kept reintroducing legislation to try to address that. So sometimes it just takes some time.
Well, again, thanks so much for joining us, Maggie. We look forward to seeing everybody, including yourself, along the campaign trail as we continue.
Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to chat with you, and good luck with this new experiment of yours. And I look forward to hopefully continuing to talk with you guys in the future.